Welcome to the first episode of DuchenSchaft. I'm Lawrence. This is my guest partner, Alex. And in this first episode, we're going to be talking about the Islamic State and to a certain extent, Islamic extremism on the whole, because I believe that they're kind of linked, obviously. The reason we're talking about this is because supposedly the Islamic State has been defeated this month. It's lost its last territory in Syria, I believe, and so in principle, the Islamic State is no more. I'd like to start first with Islamic extremism as a whole, and obviously the Islamic State comes out of the Iraq war to a certain extent, but Islamic extremism is much older than that and goes much further back. A military defeat of some ideology is one thing, but there needs to be a political and philosophical defeat of this ideology to a certain extent. First of all, why do you think Islamic extremism is a thing nowadays?
Okay. First, can I come back to something?
Yeah, of course.
ISIS still has some territory in the border in between Syria and Iraq. I mean, they lost the last threshold, the last urban threshold in Raqqa. But they still have a small territory which is not, it doesn't contain any resources. We're talking about mainly desert area. So that's why we think now they're gone, because they don't have power over any city or anything. But I think that, they're not totally defeated yet. Now, they are defeated from a military point of view. They don't have any key areas from which they can operate, let's say, in a more developed manner. Then your question was exactly, can you
why is Islamic extremism a problem in the first place? What are the sort of cultural, political, and philosophical roots of it? And and this goes back beyond even the Second World War, and things back to I think the 1920s, when the Muslim Brotherhood first started becoming influential in Egypt to a certain extent, perhaps a bit later. But in general, this is not a problem that started with even 9/11 or even before that, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and the Mujahideen that went there. Before there's a lot of this problem or this ideology existed before that. And the question is, to me, I have my certain ideas as to why this might be the case, but why did the Muslim world turn to not the Muslim world, but why is it such a prevalent ideology? What do you think? For instance, I can share my perspective. I think that it's quite a popular Western-centric perspective, but that's that the Muslim world to a certain extent saw the hypocrisy of the Western world, be it on an economic level where, it's an opportunity and blah, 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 but really it was exploitation of the Muslim populations and resources in the Muslim world. And then from a sort of cultural perspective as well, it's supposedly more enlightened and wanting to live in a more responsible and thoughtful way, but really it's again hypocritical, because the Western world, I believe, acquiesces very hard to very primal instincts. For a big example would be that if anything, women are more sexualized in our society than they were before, and that seems counter to our ideals of more enlightened ideals, for lack of a better word.
But do you think it is more like has specifically to do with Islam, or don't you think it's more like a pattern that you find in most of the religions, and in general, not only the religions, just in human behavior, when things are in an extreme state, you get towards extreme measures and you start acting in an extreme way. So to me, there is an association, for example, I would say with the Salafist, which is an very extreme way of looking at Islam, that developed in the end of the 18th century, it started to have more. The idea became one, and then more in the 19th century again. But I don't think it is associated with Islam. I think it's more of a human behavior. You know what I mean? It's more something that you will find whenever some community is in deep trouble, even not a community, just a person. Whenever you are in a big problem, you react in a very extreme way. And of course, when you're desperate, religion gives you a way out. It gives you hope. It gives you something to believe in. So to me, it is normal that these people that are right now probably in a very extreme situation lean towards that. To me, it is not directly linked to Islam. Islam is just a tool.
Well, what about in the past? In the nowadays, obviously, it's easy to see the pressures that are on the Muslim world, be they, political or economical or military. But that wasn't necessarily the case before. I think that in the 1950s in Egypt, there was a sort of backlash towards secularism. And we saw multiple Egyptian secular leaders get assassinated by Muslim groups and so forth. And so the question is, why was there this backlash in the first place? And I think that it comes because they didn't trust, they didn't see the Western vision of the world, and the way the West talked and the way it acted were not necessarily aligned, and it was just a load of bullshit, really, to a certain extent. And so they looked for an alternative within their existing culture. And this culture, obviously, the Islam and religion, in much the same way that Christianity was in the past in Europe, was the center of cultural power and political power. And so there was no alternative, and we saw that with the Egyptian uprising, where there's mass democratic movement. They get rid of this despotic leader, and then there's no cultural political alternative to turn to, and in the end, despite this sort of very sort of liberal feeling to the whole uprising, we end up with this highly illiberal regime being in power, which is the Muslim Brotherhood. And so there's kind of...
But the thing is, I mean, now we're talking about something very specific, the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is a movement that afterwards influenced a lot of different movements in the area. And Fatah, Hamas, they all come from the Muslim Brotherhood. Now we have, we had a Muslim Brotherhood regime in Egypt that got taken off. They have a strong influence on the area. Now, to me, it is not so much linked to certain groups, more to desperate times. And I mean, the suicide, now we have to see, I mean, to me, extreme religion exists everywhere. Right. You have it in the Jewish religion, in the Christian religion, and in the Muslim religion. And now we see, for example, with the Rohingyas in Myanmar, that you also have Buddhists that do extreme things. I don't know if that is, again, so linked to religion, but what I mean is that you have these extremisms in any religion. Now, for me, now we're in a specific time. These suicide attacks that have been going on for not so long. This is something relatively new. It has nothing to do with Salafism or with extreme beliefs and nothing. This is really when somebody is so cornered that he doesn't have any way out. And this gives hope that in ISIS you can see that ISIS it was always playing on the hope of anyone. It could be somebody living in Brussels, somebody living in Iraq, anybody who's desperate. You give him hope, you give him a way out, and anybody would come.
I recently saw a documentary which followed a bunch of suicide bombers that were with the Al-Nusra Front in Syria. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't really get this feeling of hopelessness for them. Like, one of these guys, they were all individually very likable characters, despite the sort of society that they might want to enact. They were all very likable, and they didn't come from, when I went there, I was expecting stories, for instance, I lived in Pakistan, my family got blown up or whatever, and so, I wanted to go to jihad, but that wasn't the case. One of the main characters, he had a family in Saudi Arabia, he came from Saudi Arabia, he had a family in Saudi Arabia, wife and kids, and was in contact with them, seemed to be happy, a genuinely likable guy. This other guy was from the UK. He didn't have a wife and family and whatnot. He eventually did meet a wife in Syria, and that suddenly made his perspective on suicide change. He used to be on the list. Once he got married, he started to have and had a kid. He started to have serious doubts as to whether he wanted to do that. And there were also young, 17-year-olds who when the first thing they'd think about when the martyrdom is the 72 virgins. And I thought that was almost a joke, a sort of satire, 70. But this was literally the first thing he said, which is, I think, an interesting commentary on guys, I suppose, as a whole, because supposedly the movement is highly, spiritual and wanting to be closer to God and elevating yourself. But then, the one of the core motivations behind their act is extremely primal in reality, And so I'm not sure quite what to think of that, but I thought it was quite interesting.
But I would agree on that, because this is taking things to a human level. Yeah. And one of the things that the media does all the time is that they take away the human component of anything that's going on. What they do most of the time is that they say, okay, this is because of Islam, and we separate. We always separate into different categories because it's much easier. And in the end, to me, like the different stories that you're talking about, they all have their own reasons for why they're there. Then, there is also kind of a trending topic attached to it, I think, because at the beginning it's people that are desperate or people that don't find a place. You can be desperate not finding a place in a society that is developed like the European is supposed to be developed, where you don't have a place, you don't know what to do with your life, and then you lean towards this like escape. But there is also, it becomes trendy at a certain point. And then at a certain point you're like, okay, I know all these people that are doing this, I want to do this too. And then a small reason can become a big issue. Mm-hmm. But I think it is a mixture of different things. We started this up with cornering people, and now it's becoming kind of a thing where everybody that has a small problem can lean towards that.
So okay. So if you think that the reason people go towards extremism is because they feel cornered, in what way do you think the Muslim world felt cornered?
Well, the thing is,
and this is historically, not not now, because obviously now with the Americans invading them and wanting to bomb whoever next, then it's quite easy to see. But historically, what made the Muslims feel cornered to that extent? Muslim certain subsets without.
I'm gonna just tell quickly a story of my experience that goes along with this, and then it goes back to it in the end. When I was living in Syria, I was going to this mosque to learn Arabic, because I started studying in the university, and I figured I'm not going to learn much here. So I went to a Quranic school that was called Abu Nur. And it was a Sufi Quranic school that was financed by Saudi Arabia, which is in itself, it's a bit of a, it's a contradiction.
Yes.
And so but many suicide bombers came out of that Quranic school. And one of the things that struck me is that when I was going there, I was obviously the only one in my class not praying, and I was just there to learn Arabic and to get more into the society. So most of the people that you would have there would be Malaysians, people from Dagestan. There were some Pakistanis, and then lost European dudes. And there was this like me, and there was this Italian guy who was a father. He came to classes with his kid, and another French guy that was totally, he wouldn't even blink. I mean, even the Malaysians, they would look at me and they were like, this dude is a bit crazy, And we had no language in common, so it was very enacting most of the time. And this Italian dude came up to me and he's like, you don't pray. And I said, no, I'm not a Muslim. And he's like, what are you doing here? I'm like, I want to learn about Islam, I want to learn about the Quran, and I want to learn Fusha, which is classical Arabic. And so he says, oh, I know a Spanish guy, he's called Abu Bakr, and he, you should meet him, he helps foreigners out and stuff like that. And I was like, yeah, sure, why not? I mean, I didn't make much of it. So a couple of days later, I receive a call. And in Spanish, and the dude is like, hey, how you doing? And I'm like, okay, who is this? And he's I'm Abu Bakr. And I'm like, cool. And how did you get my number? And he's like, you gave it to my friend, the Italian guy. I was like, no, I didn't give him the number. Where the fuck did you get my number? And he's like, no, you gave it to him. You don't remember? And I was like, no, I'm sure I didn't give it to him. But I was curious, so I said, okay, let's go. And he's like, let's meet up in the market. Next to, I lived in an area that was called Rukneddin, that is on the Kasyu mountain in Damascus. And he's like, come with me, you know, we'll go through the market there. It's a very nice market. And we'll get to know each other. I said, fine. So we went and we started to walk through the market. And he started, first of all, he didn't talk about religion at all. Nothing. Just to me, so why you here? You know, what interests you here? And then he started to criticize our developed society. And criticize in the same way that a left-wing guy would. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So just saying, yeah, but this is uneven, you know, it's unequal, you know, the richer get richer, the poorer get poorer, the education, everything, and things that you would agree on. That, I mean, any human being, even a right-wing guy would agree on, because they're very humane. I mean, the left always leans more to play with those things, but they're very humane feelings that we all have, you know? And so, of course, I was agreeing with him. And then we talked about this for 2 hours, you know, and most of the time agreeing with each other. And then he's like, so come to the Italian dude's place, I don't remember his name, and we're going to eat there together and we're going to discuss stuff. And I was like, sure, let's go. And then so once we got there, we started eating, of course, very traditional. I mean, and I didn't even see the wife. She would just bring the things through the door and the kid would bring them in. And we were sitting on the floor eating. And then at some point it started, you know? Don't you believe that the solution to all these problems is this?
This being Islam?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then you start, but in a very mellow way, you know? Just introducing it, saying, oh, and I was like, yeah, cool. I mean, Islam provides certain solutions to certain things. I mean, I was very open, of course. I mean, I'm totally agnostic. So to me, it's not, I didn't feel like I would pass on to the other side at any moment. But I was, of course, ready to listen to any argument. And it was very interesting for me. And so we start talking about it. And then it became more and more and more and more aggressive, more and more and more and more and more. And after a couple of hours, I was done. I was like, okay, I'm going home. And they were like, no, stay, we'll continue talking about this. And I was like, look, I don't, you know, this was it for me. I don't want to talk about this anymore. Now I felt kind of uncomfortable, you know, at a certain point I was like, okay, this is too much pressure.
Do you think they were trying to recruit you or indoctrinate you, convert you?
The thing is, whatever convert me for sure. That is, the hadiyah, the gift they want to, if you convert somebody to Islam, then it's like you're given a gift so that you will be rewarded with that afterwards.
By God,
yeah.
By Allah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, I mean, another interesting thing that they were saying is that they would help me economically, that I wouldn't need anything. That the Italian dude was always saying, but you see, Abu Bakr will help you, because I was starting to have no money there. I was looking for a job, and so they were telling me, no, but you don't need to worry about this, you know. And I mean, this dude, I can't say what they were doing, but it sounded very sketchy to me. He was doing import-export. He was also working at the Spanish embassy, which is very weird. And afterwards, they threw him out. And this dude, he was, to me, a very dangerous dude. Like, I don't know exactly what he was doing. I can't say. I don't want to overstep here, but he looked very dangerous to me. Like somebody that is recruiting people for a bigger cause.
Yeah, well, the way you describe it, how, you know, first he wants to make you comfortable, you know, tell you the things you want to hear, and then that he starts to move on gently to suggesting that, and then more aggressively. I think that, yeah, conversion was definitely the goal, but, and clearly it's something that he did quite often.
Yeah, he knew what he was doing.
Yeah.
He definitely knew what he was doing, because I think he was the one who brought the Italian dude here, to Syria, and I think he was known everywhere. Everybody knew him. And afterwards, I talked with somebody in the Spanish embassy who was supposed to be like intelligence.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah. And he was a total tool. I mean, I'm not gonna say his name, but I really should, because he was like, it's a shame towards my country. And this dude, like, we were talking, and this guy actually told me that he worked in intelligence. And then afterwards, like, I saw him another day, and I talked with him, and I was like, because you work in intelligence, and he was like, how do you know that? And I was like, what? You have to be fucking kidding me. No, I swear, man, it was really like in a fucking comedy movie. He was so dumb. And this dude didn't speak a single word of Arabic. He knew nothing. So to me, it doesn't, afterwards when I see it, it doesn't surprise me that we know so little about how to proceed afterwards in these countries.
So what do you think this guy wanted then? Do you think did he want you to go back to Europe or to Belgium, as the case may have been, and do what he did to here? Or I mean, it's
I don't know, man.
Clearly there was some motivation behind, he didn't just want to convert you. There must have been some ulterior motive.
I'm pretty sure, man. Well, first of all, there is the conversion part, which I think is a very strong case. And then second of all, these guys are organized because the guy from the consulate, from the Spanish consulate that worked in intelligence, he was like, oh no, this dude is dangerous. You should be careful with this dude. And so obviously, but man, the rest is, I can think about certain things, I can suppose certain things, but I'm not sure. So I prefer not to say anything because I'm not sure. I mean, for sure, this dude he was very dodgy.
Yeah.
And I mean, the whole environment was very dodgy.
Well, just the way he got your phone number, that's like, gets some connection, whatever database or your form you filled out with your phone number, he would have had access to.
I'm pretty sure it was from the mosque. The mosque gave it away. I mean, that's the only logical explanation, because the government is not going to give the government. Bashar al-Assad is totally against this, So it couldn't be the government. So it is kind of a weird. My point being with this is that they try to recruit anyone that they feel is weak. Because what the fuck am I doing? I'm 23, 24 years old in Damascus. I have no job. I'm starting to run out of money. I'm a bit disgusted with our society. I'm looking for answers somewhere else. So he's like, okay, this is the perfect victim. And I think this is what we look for here. Somebody that doesn't find a place.
This disgust with society. Do you think, coming back to my original question, my original point, do you think that might be a reason why? Okay, you see society and you're like, God, this is bad. It's totally against my values. I'll find something in this case, in the Western world, you have more sort of philosophical options, I'd say, in terms of where you turn. I mean, if you're like you hate capitalism, materialism, and all of that, which is a perfectly reasonable thing to do. You can turn to many different philosophical schools where it could be which teach you different values. Without listing them all. Whereas in the Muslim world at the time, perhaps this wasn't there, and so you didn't necessarily have this. There was only one option. If you reject modernity, so to speak, and like going towards a more liberal society and whatnot, which seems to have been the sort of trajectory at the time, then you only had one alternative, which was Islam. And then the more cornered they felt, the more external pressure was put on their society, and the more it seemed to be going towards liberal type society, the more they went deeper and more extreme into how they would use Islam or interpret Islam to kind of like counter this lifestyle or society that they rejected.
Things I would disagree on that, because at the same time, if you see societies like the Saudi Arabian one or the Arab Emirates one, or even Qatar is a bit different, but they are the most, like the Salafist, the Wahhab family are probably one of the most extreme like governments you can have and extreme Muslims, and at the same time they are at the capitalism in its core. Because I mean, the society in Saudi Arabia is like what 4% of the population has all the riches, and all the other people are dirt poor. So it is controversial because it's all a game here in the end. So I want to be a Muslim, but I want to win something with it, and everybody wants to win something with what they have. So it's very controversial. I don't know, but to get back to the roots of this, if we're talking, for example, about the roots of, ISIS right now.
Yeah.
Because the main thing that we're trying to discuss here today is really ISIS. So to get back to the roots, you were saying what made the Muslim countries become like this. So if you look at ISIS, okay, and you take a country like Iraq. Iraq was, when Saddam Hussein was there, I'm not defending the reign of Saddam Hussein in any way, but I'm trying to point out the realities that were,
But that's the thing, no matter, reality always stinks, generally speaking, and you could, I'll let you speak, but, you have in 2003 or whatever, you had Saddam, and the stability or whatever that he brought. In Syria now you have the same sort of conundrum where you have Bashar al-Assad, who's a tyrant dictator who does nasty things, versus the Islamic Front, which is also extremely nasty. And so yeah, we can talk about that afterwards, but it's similar. The situation hasn't changed.
No, it's, for me the situation changes a lot. I mean, let's go back to Iraq, then I can do the same thing with Syria. In Iraq, before the war, in Iraq you had, first of all, you had a minority governing, so the Sunni, and the Kurds, they were treated very badly, and the Shia as well were treated badly, but which is the majority, which is kind of weird, but
60%, is it?
Something like that. Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe Yago can fact check on that if he has time, but it's not that.
He's
important.
listening, probably not.
And so one of the things, I met people in the Middle East that would study in Iraq, everything paid from different countries. A Palestinian, Jordanian, for example, that would go to Iraq, study in university there. Everything paid. He told me that you could walk with a piece of gold on your head, leave it on the floor, go buy something, come back, and then take that gold and go back home. Nobody would steal anything. There weren't many of the issues that we have in our society. I can give you another example. In Syria, nobody's homeless. Well, nobody was homeless. There was, of course, people would disappear. There was horrible things happening. But it was stable. It wasn't a country at war where people were dying all the time. And since the Iraq war started, the turmoil that has been created, war always creates these extreme behaviors and these extreme mentalities, and they come out of there. I mean, Al-Qaeda became so strong because Afghanistan was invaded, because Iraq was invaded, and then ISIS came out. And you know that the Russians, they have a joke where they say, how are the Americans going to destroy ISIS? They're going to create ISIS 2. How are they going to destroy ISIS 2? They're going to create ISIS 3. And it keeps on going like that. It's always like this. And after the American invasion in Iraq, the way things were handled were so hard. First of all, it's another totally different discussion if you're for the invasion or not. But second of all, if you invade, okay, let's say we invaded. How can you handle it so badly? How can you do things so badly that you get to this state? Was it 2003? I think it was when, I don't remember what month in 2003, they invaded Iraq, March, and so...
23rd, I believe. It's when the
wow.
shock and awe campaign, believe. Yeah, Yago, don't fact check that. I don't want to be wrong.
But, we're in 2017 now. Iraq has been in war for 14 years, and it doesn't look like it's going to get better. I mean, now we've got ISIS out of the way. Well, like we said, we got ISIS out of the big cities, and but now we have a problem with the Kurds.
Right, yeah.
we're gonna have. I mean, we're having very big. How do you say that? Not racial tensions, but not even tribal. But it's just like between different ethnical tensions that are going to continue going on, because you have on one side you have the Sunni and the Shia that are really divided, because all that
seems to be getting worse as well, because obviously the two nations that represent either sort of population are Iran and Saudi Arabia. And also, well, first of all, they've been treating the Iraq war and the Syrian war and Palestine and Lebanon as sort of proxy wars, Yemen as well, where this just doesn't help at all, you know, where these people are, there are genuine socio-political problems in these countries, and you get these other countries coming in and looking, right, how do I extract the maximum advantage from this situation, and it's just not helpful, because everything just escalates as a result, and people start shooting each other more. And it seems now that, you know, just before these countries were limited to proxy wars, but it seems more and more like, you know, they're like actively at each other's throats now, with the sort of comments. And that's not to say that, you know, they're going to start bombing each other. I think Iran loses that every single day anyway, from a pure military perspective.
Really?
Yeah. Well, Saudi Arabia is very well equipped. You know, the most powerful asset that any military force can have is airplanes. And I mean, Saudi Arabia has like the best airplanes that you can get, more or less. Yeah, slightly less good than the Americans, but they've got extremely good airplanes that they bought from the Americans and from the Brits. And I mean, the Iranians are stuck with, you know, planes that they bought from the Americans in the 1960s and stuff like that.
But what I mean, does that really make a war? Because the Afghans have Kalashnikovs from the Russian era, and that nobody can control them. And I mean, the Iranians have much more experience in war.
Well, okay, I'm not saying that, you know, somebody's going to invade them, but I mean, if Saudi Arabia wanted to cripple Iran and just say, literally, we're going to blow up all your power stations, all your bridges, you know, all your communication stations, they could. And I mean, Iran would be back in the dark ages. Yeah, they could be in their caves or whatever with their AKs and stuff, but you know, meanwhile the Saudi Arabians will be burning petrol, like living like kings, you know, with lots of electricity and stuff. Yeah, and that's what I mean. It's not I'm not talking about full scale invasion. I'm talking about, you know, literally just taking the other guy out the game and like whatever. And then,
but I don't think that. But
ideally, obviously, that wouldn't happen.
It's a different discussion.
Yeah, but it's ramping up.
But it's interesting. I didn't know that they were so militarily equipped. The Saudi.
Well, you know, the Iranians have no allies really, other than the Russians, and the Russians have shit stuff for the well, not really, but it's not. Anyway.
I mean, the Russians, they have a shitload of power. I mean, that's the thing. And
but most of the Russian power is derived, I think, from like their nuclear weapons for the most part. You know, because what are you going to do when somebody's got 7,000 nuclear warheads? You know, ready to go, boom, button, and off they go. Hopefully it doesn't come to that, but I think that a lot of it comes from that and historical influence and stuff. It's complicated.
Yeah, I think, but we're not at that stage. I don't think so. I think we're not at that stage for the moment. And yeah, of course, these two. I
want to come back to the Kurds actually, right? Because obviously the question of Kurdish statehood is complicated, because their ethnic population is spread out over so many different countries, but isn't it kind of a good thing in a way, right? Because I think that the impression I get from the Kurdish population is that they're not anywhere near as ideological or religious as the populations that surround them, and more liberal in a way, particularly with respect to women, for instance. You know, there were all these semi-propaganda stories of female combatants and stuff like that.
But it is true.
And
I mean, in the Kurdish army, if you have a main general, you have one man and one woman. They try really very hard to have some sort of equality in that.
So you know, in a way, this Kurdish awakening gives me a certain amount of hope, because obviously it's scary, because you don't want the Kurds and the Iraqis or the Syrians or the Turks or whatever. The Turks and the Kurds are basically already at war, soft war, you know. and but still, you know, in a sort of area where I think it's so depressing, the way people live and the vision that people have on how life and society should be organized. Because, you know, I can empathize to a certain extent with Muslim extremists, right? I can look to understand why it is why they act this way, why they might want to reject this society and install this one. But that doesn't necessarily mean I sympathize at all with the kind of society that they actually want to do, you know? Whereas to a certain extent, I think with the Kurdish, you can, at least from a, you know, humanistic point of view. You can empathize very easily because they've been oppressed for however, since the Ottoman Empire or whatever. And you can sympathize because I think that it seems like a better direction for the Muslim or the Middle East to go for everybody.
The thing is, I have to be realistic here. And for sure, I agree with you. I mean, I think that the Kurds, I like the Kurds, the way they want to organize their society, and I like certain values behind them. But to be totally realistic, I think that the Kurds have no chance. I mean, it's horrible to say, but they really have no chance. They're going to have on one side that, first of all, they were when I was there in northern Iraq, it's where Marines would go on holiday.
Yeah, to Kirkuk, is it not? Is that
no? Kirkuk is Erbil. Kirkuk was not.
I'm just
so
trying
fun.
to drop words.
Was not so fun to be around. But Erbil was you had like a safer north with a huge amount of checkpoints, and you had landmines everywhere, so you had to be very careful. But for me, the society that they were trying to build was a lot based on the American help, and the Americans are the first ones that said, okay, now you have your northern state. It was a way of having like a safe haven in Iraq, and they turned their back on them now. They're like, okay, this is, you know, now it's your problem. And now what are they?
Why do you think they did that?
Because they're not interested anymore. They want to get out. They're looking for ways out.
It's too much of a clusterfuck.
They went inside there, and everything became a clusterfuck. And now there's no way out. There's no way out of that apart from letting the people kill each other. And so the thing, this sectarian violence, that's the word I was looking for before, that Zarqawi started, you know, started massively. And al-Zarqawi became so powerful thanks to this war.
Zarqawi is the leader of Al Qaeda in Iraq after the 2003 invasion.
Yeah, he was like, it wasn't called Al Qaeda in Iraq. It was
it
called,
had a different name.
I have it wrote it down. The Jamaat Jaish al Sunnah wal Jamaah. So this was, of course, an Al Qaeda affiliate. But this guy, he was a Jordanian that was already like, he was an extremist, and he became so powerful thanks to this war. And so many things have sprung out of this war. So much extremism. There you really have the answer to the extremism question. Where does it come from? From this shit that was created by this absurd invasion. That, you know,
I don't know, because Islamic extremism, in its expression and like in how it lashes out at society is one thing, right? But the society that it wants to create is another, right? For instance, like a suicide bomber blowing himself up because he's unhappy at the American invasion is different to some extremist Muslim cleric who wants, you know, a woman to be basically a baby factory, or you know that. Crime and punishment is doled out in a certain way, or chucking homosexuals of roofs and things like that. These are like, they're sort of part of the same thing, but they're two different elements, right? You can have, the backlash, but then also the intent, the motivation behind the backlash, right? And to a certain extent, it's hard that like the Iraq war and all of that has made it difficult because you have a very understandable backlash to the military pressure and, you know, the foreign oppressor that's coming in and trying to change your society in a way that you don't want. But then you also have to like, look, okay, you don't want that society. What society do you want? And then you also have to be critical of that.
But the thing is, man, I mean, there was a secular, all these proxy wars that we're talking about, is really the key to me, is really the answer. Because what did you have in Iraq before the invasion? A secular government dictatorship, a secular dictatorship, okay? And so what do you have in Saudi Arabia? In Saudi Arabia, you have a Muslim
theocracy, essentially.
Yeah.
Well, it's like
king,
a royalty.
Royalty. Yeah, it's the Wahhab family. And what do? They try to establish power through Sharia, and it's a tool. And most of these, these extremisms that get created are financed. And so, what would you lean towards? Something that actually gives you money and permits you to live. So whoever
you think that it's mainly a material thing and not a sort of spiritual, philosophical.
No, I think they're linked. I mean, but what I say is that I'm tired of hearing just one side of the argument. Okay, and I think that the other side, the human materialistic, is much bigger, actually. Okay. And I think, like, you have a country like Saudi Arabia where you don't have these issues. Where do you have these issues? In countries like Iraq and Syria that are in a complete turmoil, in Afghanistan. In these places you have these issues. Mm-hmm. If you look at Chechnya, if you look at all these places, they are in a complete state of turmoil. And so what comes out of it? Whoever, if you're in somebody invades your country, and then you're trying to fight against them, and you have some power next to you, and he's like, okay, I'm gonna give you this money if you keep on fighting these people. Of course you're gonna, it's not as simple. I'm very simplifying it a lot. You lost your family. You're in a very distressed. You don't know. You lost your mind a bit. And so what do? You lean towards something that gives you a solution, a way out of fighting, and for a way out, you need money. For a way out, you need faith. So you lean towards that to be able to actually count. Because otherwise you're not counting, you're a victim all the time. And one of the things that you see in these countries is that people don't want to be victims. I mean, they fight back. And that's something that I really respect, to be honest.
Of course, right?
They don't, I mean, the Afghans, they're not going to let 1 inch go. Then they fight against each other, and this is the whole issue. One of the things that happens is that the Muslims are totally divided. So this is our way in and we divide them as much as we can. I mean, if you look at the different factions now in Syria, you've got Ahrar al-Sham, you've got Tahrir al-Sham, you've got ISIS, you've got the FSA, you've got the Kurds, you've got so many different factions, and every single government is supporting one or the other depending on the moment. So we're putting them against each other, and of course crazy things are going to come out of it. We're at war. One of the things that always impresses me is that if these people are at war, they're going to do terrible things. We can't just be, wow, but this is horrible. No, we're creating this.
What do you make of, because for me that there is a certain, moral dilemma behind, supporting another faction materially. So for instance, the West, I think, typically supports the Free Syrian Army, right? Mm-hmm. Because supposedly it's more aligned. And, they support it because they don't want ISIS to take control. And they also want to get rid of Bashar al-Assad. Mm-hmm. Do you think there's any kind of moral imperative, when you see, for instance, to give an example that we're all, actually I won't use it, but no, because it's a little bit too much. Actually, fuck it. So let's say, in Germany in the 1940s, okay? Yeah. Germany did not invade anybody. They're a nice, peaceful nation, right? But they're still massacring all the Jews, 1 million at a time, okay? Yeah. Or like tens of thousands every day. And we know this, right? Do you think that there's no moral imperative to say, this is unjust, we need to do something about it? We can't just let it happen. Right, this is an evil society where they do horrible things to people. We would have the power to try and change that, okay? And that's not to say that the West motivations are twisted by capitalism and materialism and influence and all these things that I think everybody's aware of to a certain extent. But just at a pure fundamental moral level, yeah. How do you feel about, the West or the Russians? Yeah, the Germany example is like one that's meant to, because it's obviously relevant to all of us as Europeans. Yeah. But like, how do you say, what do you just say? Fuck it, fuck the Jews, right? Or do you say, fuck it, we're going to do something about it? And yeah, we're going to end up killing people and losing people as a result. But, morally something has to be done. And like to a certain extent, right, with ISIS, it's obviously nowhere near as bad as what the Nazis did. But the ISIS carried out genocides. They, stick people's heads on spikes in the center of town and stuff like that. There's morally, I don't think there's any doubt that it's not. Obviously, our morals are like sourced from the Enlightenment values and romanticism to a certain extent, or whatever, a rationality as well, and theirs are more from the Quran.
Go on.
So I mean, if something stinks and you got some air freshener, or you can freshen the air, should you not do it?
That is a very beautiful metaphor. No, I think that is. No, but what I mean is that, man, it is a hypocrisy to me. Because in the sense, I wouldn't extrapolate. Can you say that in English?
Yeah, extrapolate.
The German problem, to
it's obviously an extreme example, but it's one that gives a clear moral question, moral ambiguity that you have to confront.
First of all, nobody knew what was going on in Germany with
true.
the Jews. No, even the Germans didn't know.
But we knew.
Okay. I disagree. But let's not get into that topic. Otherwise, we're going to get off topic very, very fast. Yes. One of the things that for me is important is that why is ISIS there? Why did ISIS get so strong? How is it possible? And the only way that is possible is because everybody took advantage of ISIS. Everybody. You had ISIS started to spring up. The Baghdadi, when they had the conflict, Al-Juliani went to Syria to create the branch of Al-Qaeda. And so Baghdadi first.
That's the Al-Nusra Front, was it not? The branch of.
He started with that, but then it got separated because of all.
That's an interesting story as well. Ayman al-Zawahiri's opposition to ISIS, even for Al-Qaeda, ISIS was too intransigent.
But what I'm trying to get at here is that the issue here is that, let's start. Who benefited from something so horrible like ISIS? Okay, the Syrian government. They're like, okay, if these guys are the opposition, then everybody's going to have to be with me. Because such a horrible opposition, no country can back it up. I mean, not openly. It's impossible. Who else benefited from this? The Turks. They were saying that the ISIS was taking over the Kurdish areas. We're like, awesome. They're making the problem for us. The Americans that want Bashar al-Assad to get out, they're like, look,
we can get rid of him.
Get rid of him. Everybody was like all the powers there. Saudi Arabia, of course, they want the Shia out of the region. ISIS was getting so strong. It's all Sunni, and they were taking over to like a Shia majority country that is Iraq and Shia minority country that is Syria. So everybody was benefiting. So everybody was turning a blind eye on ISIS. So whose fault is it that ISIS got so strong? It's the thing is here, you can't compare it to something that's happening in North Korea and you're like, okay, look at what's happening in there. This is horrible. We can't let people live like this. No, I created this. Well, which to a certain extent, North Korea a bit, but so we're really guilty in this aspect. And now we come as the heroes to help. No, we're not helping anyone. What we're doing is we're trying to impose our ways, and we're trying to get a benefit out of it. How was he called? The commander wrote it down as well. General John Abisaid, who was the U.S. Central Commander, he said that the only reason to invade Iraq was oil.
Well, I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Well, then if you look at these patterns, and then you say, oh no, we're helping now because ISIS is there. First of all, in their own way, the ones that have done the most against ISIS is Russia.
Right.
Yeah. But and they're also forcing on their own
What scenario if let's say nobody had gotten involved, okay, and it's hard to
But
tell
when?
them.
At what point?
Okay. Well, let's just hypothetically say that things played out naturally, and like nobody was pulling any strings, nobody was playing, and you had ISIS versus Al-Assad. Okay,
Yeah.
which do you prefer? Because there has to be a choice at some point,
But this
right?
is very simplistic. No, because this isn't like this. I mean, what do you prefer? A kick in the testicles or a punch in the face? I prefer a punch in the face, let's say, okay?
Okay.
But first of all, it's not up to me to decide. That's the first thing. I don't think I should decide what should be going on in another country. The thing is that the interventionism has been going on for so long that we've forgotten that these people, they don't, these countries, they're not self-governed. This is a lie. I mean, we've not only us, but the whole region is always influencing in anyone's business. Saudi Arabia is always influencing. Iran as well. Everybody's trying to manipulate whatever they can. So it is very hard for me to say, okay, when does this start? When does this stop? Is intervention helping in any way? Whatever we've seen about intervention.
But that's my point. Is
It's
that
making it worse.
Let's like not let it intervene and let it like play out. Okay, hypothetically.
So from now on, after
No, just even before. Let's say it's hard to extract ISIS from intervention because it's obviously born out of it to a certain extent. Okay, but forget that if you can, hypothetically, right? And let's say we have ISIS versus Al-Assad, and both of them are bad, right? But which one's worse?
But I think by far, I mean, but this is a very...
Okay, finish that. By far, who's worse?
By far, well, ISIS is 1,000 times worse.
Right, okay, so, but then let's say ISIS wins.
So what?
And then, so ISIS takes over Syria. ISIS is 1,000 times worse. The population of Syria has it 1,000 times worse as a result.
But this is, for me, the whole problem of the situation. We take things in such a big scale, and we take decisions on something that, for me, is much more complicated. What is going on in Syria? Is there an opposition to ISIS? Is nobody intervening inside? Are the people rising up against ISIS?
Of course.
I mean, there's so many questions to be asked to answer that question, and I don't know about the situation that would involve. One of the things that happened when they invaded Iraq.
But it's not about that, Alex. It's that I think that to a certain extent, you're unwilling to, you're willing to accept that one is, at least in your mind, unequivocally morally deficient to the other. And both of them are morally deficient, okay? There's no question about that. Let me just make that clear, right? And so if both of them want power and one of them is worse, well, clearly the outcome for the population, which is what is supposedly the people who are at stake, their life will be worse as a result. And they will suffer more. And, well, to a certain extent, yes, it is, right? But if you can at least take a sort of, you can distill these problems down to core moral issues, which you usually can to at least a certain extent.
No.
So let's say in Syria then, for instance, we had this one opposition group that was super democratic and super liberal and some proto whatever, they're super progressive in their outlook, way beyond what we've got in the West and whatnot. That's really wow, these guys know exactly how things should be. Them versus ISIS versus Al-Assad.
But again,
then does it not?
To be totally honest, these questions make no sense for me because what happens is that situations are too complicated. They're never that black and white. Of course, if you have some evil guy just saying, okay, look at this, he's going to beat up some dude in the street, and you're like, okay, this guy needs to be helped because this evil big dude is going to punch him in the face. But this is a very...
Well, there you go.
Walt Disney situation. I mean, this is... The situations are always very complicated. Maybe the small dude fucked his wife and raped his kid. What the fuck do I know? And maybe he's beating the shit out of him because he did that. I don't know. I don't know what's going on. And if me intervening is going to help, I need to assess that situation first. I need to see what's going on. If I have the power to just say, okay, let's stop for a second and talk about this, then yeah, sure. Dialogue, helping out, seeing how I can, I can offer a table. One of the things that Mujica did with Colombia was an amazing thing. He offered a table. He was like, okay, FARC on one side and the government on the other, and let's talk. This is an intervention that I think is awesome. It's a very good way of helping. But coming in and saying who's the good one, who's the bad one, in a marital situation, for example, you have a wife and a husband, and they're having issues. These issues, they come from so far away. You come in, you have no idea what the fuck is going on. They at the end, they're going to turn against you. I mean, it's very hard to get into a country and really do the right thing. Like I agree with you in the
thought experiment.
Walt Disney idea.
No, of course, right?
But the reality is a different one.
Absolutely, I agree, and that's kind of the thing, right? Is that that no matter what you do, there's no way to you let it play out, and you take the risk of like the outcome being very bad for the people, like in the Second World War, to go back to fuck it, let the Nazis do what they want, they can take over the world, right? And then that would not lead to a happy society or whatever.
But this is a different thing. There's countries are invading other countries. It's a totally different situation. I mean, of course, if Iraq now was invading Belgium, let's say, well, of course I would fight back. I mean, this is a totally different thing. Somebody comes to your house, you do something about it. But if this is happening, you can always try and offer help. You can offer humanitarian help. You can say, what do you need? What can we do to make this problem better? No one asks these questions. One of the first things that the Americans did when they invaded Iraq is they took the whole Saddam's, all the Sunni that were in power.
Yeah.
They took them off. They had no Sunni representatives in the how was that guy called, the American that was taking care of the government there? He was also a total tool. He was called, I don't know.
Was it not Petraeus? Or was that after? David Petraeus?
No. Paul Brenner.
Yeah, okay, he was a civilian.
All the Baathists, no, he was a diplomat. All the Baathists that were in power.
Diplomats are civilians, just.
Yeah, okay, but the thing is, there was no. This is a politician. It shouldn't be.
No, you're right.
It shouldn't be like a general that's governing a country. Otherwise, what the fuck are we doing? What are we even invading in the first place? But he took all the Baathist party away, and what happened is that I don't know how many leaders. It was like 25 of the top ISIS leaders were all Baathists.
Do you think, to come back to the core question, which is of ISIS as a whole, do you think that the fact that a lot of the top leadership of ISIS came from sort of people who have experience in governance and how to run agencies or departments or whatever? Do you think that is big? Yeah,
that is also determining. But for me, the most determining part is that we let them. This is the most. I agree with you. I think this is a very important point. But the most important point is we just let them. We're like, okay.
In what sense?
That we didn't intervene. Nobody intervened when ISIS was getting stronger.
Right.
Everybody was letting it happen because it served their own purpose. So I mean, in the end,
That's not necessarily that because you have the in the war in Iraq, you had the troop surge, which was kind of as a response to the rise of sectarian violence, which had a lot to do with the Al-Mahdi army, for instance, in Baghdad, which was part of the sort of the way that this movement, or whatever it was called, snaked its way into ISIS, went through the Al-Mahdi army. And as a result, or as a consequence of all this violence, the Americans threw manpower at Iraq, and eventually they took him out. So there was a sort of response to this.
No, but you're talking way before.
This is in 2007. That's right.
Yeah. This is way before ISIS really sprung out.
But this is when this the sort of strategy that we saw that ISIS.
But no other terrorist group has taken so much area and so many cities as ISIS has done.
No, yeah, yeah.
And this is because we let them. I mean, there's no other reason. I mean, we let them get stronger, and I agree. The military, the military knowledge and the political knowledge and the economical knowledge that they used afterwards, once they had their territory to establish themselves and all that stuff, it helped a lot. I totally agree with you. And it's not only that. I mean, all these guys, most of these guys, were in Kambuka. Kambuka was a prison that they opened after all the scandals from Abu Ghraib, where we passed from torturing kind of a way to a more like this is not nice what you're doing, we should all live together. And al-Baghdadi was one of the guys, he was there, he was in Kambuka.
And a lot of the people that were in got debathed and stuff were also there.
So this really developed, they learned from each other. I mean, al-Baghdadi was one of the guys that was actually helping the Americans to communicate with these extremists, because he wasn't that extremist at that moment. He wasn't in that state of mind, and he became that in Kambuka. That, I mean, we've done, well, I haven't done anything, but they've done so.
In a way. We all have. That's the problem. We're all guilty to a certain extent, right?
But we,
if only by inaction or whatever.
Yeah. But what I mean is that we let this thing like get out of hand because of sheer stupidity. And this is a mistake that the Americans always do. They always do that. They get somewhere, they think it's going to be easy, they don't listen to any of their advisors because they don't. And they just go for it. And any of the military advisors, they say, no, don't do that. This is going to be a horrible mistake. Fuck that. We're doing this. And then in the end, this is what happens. And I'm not even discussing, I mean, I don't agree with interventionism in general, but I'm not even discussing that. I'm taking into consideration, let's say that interventionism is a good thing and we're doing it. Well, please do it fucking right.
Yeah.
Nobody, I mean, you have to understand the complexity of a country. I remember when the uprising started in Syria, I met some guys that lived in Syria when I was there. And they were going to the demonstration to demonstrate against al-Assad and with all the Syrians and Schuman. And they told me, yeah, you want to come with us? And I was like, no fucking way. And they were like, why? Because I think it's, this is going to be, the result is going to be much worse.
So these people were demonstrating for intervention and which in the end, the British Parliament is quite responsible for stopping that idea, because they rejected it precisely, I suppose, for reasons that you agree with.
I think economical reasons, but
You think so?
Yeah, I think so.
Mostly. Do you not think that can be both?
It can be both, sure. I'm very cynical.
Yes, that's very cynical. But, I mean, can you not, when things are not done and not intervened for partly the right reasons, should that not be, if you're anti-intervention, they're like, look, we can't intervene because we'll probably make it worse. We don't understand what's going on and whatnot, and it'll cost too much money. Okay, I mean, should that not?
That it plays too. But for me, in the end, if you look at the external policy for most of our countries, in the end, I don't see that happening. If you look at the way that we treat even the African continent, whatever, the way we economically behave, where we exploit whatever we can, it doesn't seem to me like there are many moral values behind it. Then afterwards, I can't talk because I don't know. I'm not in government. I don't know. But from what I gather, we're defending our own interests, and when it's not in our interest to do something, we don't do it. And I don't see anybody in Syria thinking about the Syrian people, because that was exactly my point when they told me, you want to come? I said, no fucking way, because this is going to create a war, and it's going to be much worse than what the situation is now. And I have never heard anybody talking about that. Never, but somebody saying, but look, this is the outcome of this. It's going to be worse. The people are going to be way worse than what they were, which is obviously what happened by far. But how are we not thinking about this? How is nobody thinking? Not one politician said, look, we can't do this. We don't know what the outcome is going to be. Many people are going to starve to death. Many people are going to die at war. we shouldn't intervene. You know, we shouldn't get into this. I've never heard that argument.
But that's almost to a certain extent what the British argument was. Or like why there was... Okay, that's not to say that every member of parliament that voted against was like that, but I'm sure that if you look at, the more left wing of Labour, you would find many MPs that would sympathise with
that say that.
And to a certain extent, from both parties. I know the thing is, you kind of hold your nose at the economical argument that they make, in the sense that they don't want to spend their money helping other people.
But the thing is, if this is true, if there is a moral background to it, why isn't it the UK government doing more humanitarian aid, trying to help the people, trying to
that's not a question for me.
But that's what I mean. What I mean is that in the end, it's just that this is convenient for us now. No, fuck it, let's not do it.
I think that's...
I'm sure there are some idealists who think the same way and who think, no, we shouldn't harm people and stuff like that. But okay, if you don't want to harm people, then at least offer some alternative, something. What can we do? Just offer something. Okay, see how can we make this problem become less big? And I don't see that state of mind either.
Well, so how now, following the fact that ISIS is defeated, mission accomplished, and all the rest, right? What's the way forward? That's a very difficult question, but how? What would you like to see in Syria and Iraq? Let's start with Syria, because that's, or let's just do Syria.
For me, Syria, first of all, we're obviously in a much, like, we have more certainty than what we had before when ISIS was having such a big territory. Now, I think ISIS in that area where they are, in that desertic area, they can still do a lot of damage. And Al-Qaeda never had a stronghold, and they always did a lot of damage. So I think we're far from being over with this problem. And then there's so many factions in Syria, and Syria is so destroyed. Who's going to pay to reconstruct Syria? The Russians are going to put some money in there, but when are we going to see Syria? I mean, this problem that was created, it's going to take so long before we see the life that was in Syria before, just the normal life of people. Mm-hmm. It's going to take a shitload of time, and I don't see it getting better very fast.
I assume that you don't think that Bashar al-Assad is the answer to maintaining some kind of stability or whatever.
I think so. I think that it's the only way out. I think this is the only way out that we have. Realistic way.
Yeah. So you're ready to hold your nose, basically.
I was, since the first day, thinking, and everybody was calling me a fascist, that Bashar al-Assad was the only way out. Not because I agree with him.
No.
I don't.
No, of course.
But because I think this is the best way out for the people. I think this is the only solution.
So the status quo, essentially.
For the moment, yeah.
Okay, but
revolutions take time.
Right. So do you think that the revolution in Syria, which this is what the unrest in Syria and the fact that ISIS moved in was as a result of the revolution and the instability and the opportunity that ISIS saw in Syria to come in and take power where a power vacuum was starting to exist, right? I mean,
what do you mean?
Well, that is the fact that the population rose up against Bashar al-Assad that sort of gave ISIS the opportunity to come in and offer an alternative, that opponents of Bashar al-Assad will go, well, this guy sucks. What are these guys like? Let's have a look, or whatever. And that's so, the revolution is what started it. Do you think it's going to end? What's going to happen with the revolution in your eyes? You've been there. You're a much better place to.
I don't think that me being there is really helped. Well, yeah. What I think is that we're gonna get like. It depends how they play it, because for me it's very hard to see a way out of this in the immediate future, because first of all, economically,
what does an ideal scenario look like for you then? Like the ideal scenario, like literally Disneyland, you know?
Disneyland, man.
No, but like what would it?
Then Bashar al-Assad leaves, and they have elections, and then everybody agrees. And
what if they elect, ISIS?
well, if they elect ISIS, who the fuck am I to say that they can't? This is the only thing. I hate Trump. I don't think that you should go against Trump. He was elected. If he does something illegal, he should be impeached. But the Americans elected Trump. This is democracy. I'm not saying democracy is perfect. I'm saying this is the way that it works. So if they elect ISIS, who am I to say what they should do? If you put a drawing in your wall that I think is horrible, I can't come to your place, take it off, and throw it out of the window.
No, but I mean, you can. There's on a pure moral level, you can say, okay, well, the values of democracy and self-determination are more important to me than the values of liberty and life, for instance. You know, let's just apply it to women, right? And under ISIS, you have 50% of the population who's going to live very nasty life, or like a complete, very unfulfilling life.
But if they vote for it?
Well, the thing, women don't have the vote, so they didn't vote for it.
No, but I mean, you're talking in an ideal point of view where people vote. We just say Disneyland, so everybody's voting and everybody's getting to that, and then they elect ISIS. Then what can I say? You know, I'm following your...
Okay, so if women decide to elect ISIS and they want to live like that, okay, that's fair enough. I think that for me, that moral question is more complicated because I think that you'd have to look at the psychological and sort of societal pressures that would be put on people. For instance, as a very basic example, people that get kidnapped sometimes fall in love with their kidnapper. That doesn't justify the kidnapper's behavior.
No, of course not.
So in this sense that, yes, okay, women might vote for ISIS, but that doesn't justify that vote, for instance.
Okay.
But so
let me throw the question right back at you. Mm-hmm. So what should we do with Saudi Arabia? What should we do with North Korea? What should we do with any government? And there's so many. And we start counting in Africa. So we have to intervene everywhere. What should we do? What should we do with Trump, who wants to grab women by the pussy? Should we just go invade America and take Trump away from power and say, hey, no, this dude is a fucking asshole, because he is a fucking asshole, and he fucking supports Duterte, a guy who just executes drug addicts. So what do we do? And this guy empowers all the wars and all that shit. What should we do with a country like France with fucking retarded François Hollande who wants to bomb Syria?
They voted him out.
Yeah, but I mean, at the moment, we can't do... We Europeans are causing shitloads of deaths. And we're always judging what's happening on the other side. I should start with my own government thinking, okay, how many inhuman things are we doing just from an economical point of view? Selling our goods, dumping our goods outside of Europe, not letting economies rise, holding, going into areas, taking all the minerals, the oil, everything that we can. We're killing shitload of people. And, first thing we should do then is go into our own government, take them away. But the problem is, it is a bit more complicated than that. So for me, interventionism, it only makes sense if my house is clean. Mm-hmm. If my government is, spotless, then I can say, okay, let's try and influence these other people. But I don't think influence is intervention, is invasion. You can always try and help. You can offer solutions. If you dialogue with that this kind of a lady boy that's governing North Korea,
Kim Jong-un.
Kim Jong-un. If you dialogue with him, you have much more possibilities that the outcome is better. Dialogue. If you have some fucking retard like Trump going against him, this is just going to make it worse. The only outcome here is horrible.
I think the generally you're right, of course, but there are limitations to dialogue, right? Because in the framework of ISIS and Islamic extremism, for instance, there's only a certain amount of dialogue you can have until your worldviews diverge too much, right? Once you get to the point where, forget about, for instance, if you say to ISIS, forget about Allah, you know, think rationally.
But what would I say that to ISIS?
Well, because to a certain extent, the society they want to create comes from this worldview that they have.
But this has nothing to do with Islam. This has nothing to do with Allah. I mean, the majority of the Muslims, not the majority, like 90% of the Muslims don't think like that.
Right.
So why would I go against?
But they do. They do not, regardless. Okay, and they're powerful.
But what I mean is that this is, first of all, this is not a behavior that you can see in Islam. And for me, this is something that people confuse. Islam is not about all these things. These people are not Muslims. These people are
no,
are
of course. Okay, ISIS is extremely, is gone off the deep end, right? But still, you need a sort of certain common framework of how you view the world, and in order to dialogue properly. I mean, you can't talk values if one side derives their values from the sky, or what they perceive to be in the sky, whereas the other derives their values from pure materialism, like the West might do.
But
so I think that my point is that
you're saying that it's not easy. I agree. But tell me one situation where intervention has helped, where the outcome wasn't worse. And for me, the important point of view is not the point of view of some guy that is in government, or Saddam Hussein getting executed, or Bin Laden, or whoever, or when they executed Zarqawi, or because what they do is execute. They just execute people. These outcomes, I don't, you can judge it from Geneva Convention's point of view and stuff like that, but I'm talking about a mother that has children and they're playing in the streets, and then at some point the children are getting killed. They have to move out of the country, or they have to stay in, but they live in fear. She loses one child, the other. When has intervention not brought that? When was the normal family not affected by that? Because any normal family, I would gather, that was living in Syria before the war is thinking, fuck, I prefer 1,000 times the regime that we had before to this shit.
Right, there's no doubt about that.
I'm pretty sure that it's the same thing. So this is, to me, the problem with intervening, that the outcome is never, even if the intention is good, if we're thinking, okay, the intention is good, we're trying to make life better for other people. But what is the outcome? It's always worse. So why would we do it? The thing is, we keep repeating the same mistakes.
I don't know. I think that if you look at the Korean War, for instance, I mean, the outcome is far from perfect. But had we not intervened, what would the outcome have been for South Korea?
The thing is, had we not, what would have been, I don't know. The thing is, and this is a very specific example where we say, okay, if this hadn't happened, where would we be? I don't know. Right,
no, of course you can't know, but
what we know is that the status quo, before we intervened, most of the times is worse. Well, most of the times, I don't know any time where it wasn't worse than what happened afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, well, you said Pol Pot, for example. We were talking about it the other day, and you talked about Pol Pot in Cambodia and stuff like that. Even when NATO came in, it was a total disaster for a very long time. And I'm not, I think there, for example, is an intervention that had to be done because it was crazy, okay? But even in that aspect, we intervened in a wrong way. We didn't do it properly. And most of the times when I see these interventions, they're not fueled by somebody thinking, okay, let's help these people out. Because if they're fueled by that, then you do it in a totally different way. You act as to better the lives, not to go in there, kill some dude, and say, okay, everything's going to change now. This is not the way of intervening. In general, I disagree with intervention, but I'm sure there are exceptions. I mean, there are moments where you probably should intervene. But the way of doing it is very complicated.
Right. And I think, if anything, what's happened with Iraq, forget about the motivations and whether you can justify it or not. I think that personally, Saddam, it's very difficult. But yeah, that we've seen that an intervention done badly leads to chaos and destruction and death on incredible scale.
Yeah.
What's the future then? I mean, for ISIS, what do you think is going to happen with ISIS and the ideology? Because it's not just in the Middle East. What's interesting is that you get lots of little groups around, even in Malaysia and in Tajikistan or Uzbekistan, where these Islamic groups pledge allegiance to ISIS.
Nigeria,
so this is and Boko Haram.
Somalia.
You have all these groups that pledge
in the
allegiance.
Sinai Desert now there was
that's
100 and I don't know how many victims.
No, 300.
300.
300 victims. Yeah. And what did the Egyptian government do as a response to this? They went and blew up a bunch of tents, and then they showed everybody the video.
Of course, yeah.
But anyway,
this Sinai problem has been going on for so long, and nobody is taking care of it. In Yemen, you have 1 person out of 8 with cholera. This is insane. This is fucking insane. And they're around, they say, up to 7 million people in the risk of starvation in Yemen. But nobody's going to intervene there because Saudi Arabia.
No, Saudi Arabia is intervening.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. But nobody gives a fuck about really this fucking huge... because this becomes an extermination. This becomes, if 7 million people are at risk of starvation, we are killing. I mean, Saudi Arabia is killing 7 million people, and Iran on their own way as well, because they're trying to help the Houthis, but in the end, nobody's taking care of the people. Nobody does that. Nobody thinks about that. And this is the hypocrisy to me, because we always hide the interventionism card behind those moral values that we don't give a fuck about. And so for me, to get back to the question, the future is the turmoil is going to continue for a while. I think there are going to be ups and downs. And Bashar al-Assad is probably going to take more and more power. I don't think he's going to control the whole region for a long period of time, if he ever does. And I think we're going to continue seeing suicide attacks in many parts of the world. And this problem is going to keep on going until at some point the aid that the rest of the world can gives a bit of structure. But if I don't see that aid coming, so I don't know.
Do you mean an aid in the humanitarian aid sense? Okay.
One of the first things is that how expensive is it going to be to reconstruct Syria?
Well, there's that question also. I mean, there's also, generally speaking, when it comes to humanitarian aid, there's also the question of how effective it is. Obviously, Africa's got a lot of lessons to teach in that respect.
Yeah, of course. But we'll also learn from that. But that's not even that. I mean, what I mean is just, okay, let's say just reconstructing Syria so that people can live again. How expensive is that going to be? This is going to be, and what's going to happen with the many of the Sunnis? There's going to be still more migration because Bashar al-Assad is probably going to kill so many people whenever he gets the chance to. He's going to eliminate all the people that were against him. And the problems that come out of this we're not done with seeing problems. I mean, in Iraq, what's going to happen with the Kurds? What's going to happen with the Sunni Shia division that is getting stronger and stronger? What is going to happen with between Iran and Saudi Arabia? There's so many factors at play that for me it's very hard to foresee what can come.
Well, I think that nobody can disagree with that. How hopeful are you?
I would say from 0 to 100, 3.
3, yeah. So you're pretty. This is not gonna end. This is not gonna get better anytime soon.
I don't see it getting better.
What about worse?
Man.
Because I mean, there is more potential for a bigger scale conflict, like we mentioned slightly earlier, or much earlier, between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Thankfully, neither are nuclear powers yet. So it could still get a lot worse in reality. And for much bigger population, it was 70 million people in Iran or something like that. So, however many, I don't know how many there are in Syria. I think that
Syria, it's around 20 something. I don't know. Yago, can you look it up?
I think that at one point there were 8 million people, which is less than the population of Belgium, living under the control of ISIS. Which is obviously 8 million. 8 million.
8 million.
There's obviously a lot of people, but in the grand scale of things, it's not that many. Without wanting to be callous, So I mean, there's potential for a lot more harm, and I think that's what's going to be interesting.
There's always, the good thing about humanity is that there's always an open door for more harm. It is not, but I agree with you. It can become much worse. Look, even the situation with Qatar and this new emir, this is something we should discuss in the future. But this new emir he's the crown prince of Saudi Arabia. That is a bit nuts, and we don't know what is going to come out of this. You know, so.
Personally, I think that the recent developments on that front give me a certain degree of hope, and I couch that hope. No, in the sense that in the sense that I get the feeling that Saudi Arabia is an extremely archaic society in its organization, and I get the feeling that he wants to change that to a certain extent. The problem is, and the doubts and the questions that come into my mind come from, what kind of society he actually wants to create. And in that sense, I think that it'll probably be hyper-materialistic, hyper-capitalistic, and all the rest, which is not necessarily a great model for happiness and well-being or whatever you want to call it. But it's better than what exists currently. I hope. I'm not sure, but I hope.
We should discuss this in another
I think we will.
Episode. But again, I think this is a desperate move because he knows that they can't live off oil.
Right.
Well, so he's looking for a way
also
out.
Socially,
but no, I don't think there has.
Do you not think there's anything?
No, because one of the things that they've been doing is that they also took down one of the princes that is in that prison that is a luxurious.
Yeah, that's incredible. I saw that.
That's incredible.
They're all staying in the Ritz Carlton in the luxury prison. It's beautiful.
It's insane. But one of those dudes is the head of Al Arabiya. Which is the media, the Arabic media, and one of the things that the Crown Prince wants is to control totally the media. So, but let's leave this for another episode. I don't agree again with the intentions. I don't know if the intentions are good or worse than his father. But I think this was a good talk for a first episode. I think we've done pretty well. Episode of DuchenSchaft. Next time we should give Yago a mic. That way he can communicate with us.
Yeah, and we'll get him a camera as well so that you can see how amazing he looks.
Yeah, Yago likes to be seen. He really likes to be seen, so we'll put a camera.
So to wrap up then, so we're fucked basically.
Idea. We have no idea what's going to happen. No, but
no idea.
I'm pretty sure.
But your outlook seems relatively pessimistic. I think you're just generally cynical as a whole, and that means that it's probably much easier to see for you the ways that things go to shit than the ways they might improve.
Let's say I don't see stability coming in the near future. I don't see that at all.
Okay. Well.
Okay.
That's we'll end on that.
We'll end on that. That's
the Middle East is unstable and will stay unstable for.
I think so.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much, and we'll see each other next time.
Yeah, next week I think we're doing another topic. We'll be doing it's wide ranging, and I'm sure we'll talk more shit. But we're going to try and talk about the social justice movement in its entirety without obviously we're two white males, straight white males,
we're straight away privileged.
I mean so what do we know? But anyway, I think we'll try and take an open-minded approach, and we'll see what comes out of it.
Otherwise we can invite black homosexual
Transsexual.
transsexual Jewish woman.
Yes.
Yeah, that
Transracial as well. Yeah. Yeah. We'll do our best with that. Anyway, thanks,
thank you
Alex,
very
and
much, and,
see all the rest of you next week.